So I work for the central IT department at Duke University. We started looking at OpenShift about a year ago and talked to Stephen and his team just down the street from us. And they came over and gave us a little presentation about how they do things. And it kind of made it clear that this is probably the way we wanted to go with container hosting. We've been using containers for a long time, at first just kind of on their own and then with an in-house developed application. But it seems like, it doesn't make any sense for us to try to maintain something like that when, there's a whole community developing OpenShift and the benefits that OpenShift has. Definitely something that we wanted to take advantage of. So we've been setting up a proof of concept. We think it's going to work for us a little better than like Docker Swarm or raw Kubernetes, because we, like the rest of you, probably have a whole bunch of customers that are external to our department, as opposed to some folks that are just doing hosting for themselves or hosting for customers or something. So kind of what we want to really get out of this is, let me show the dissipated wins here. The two big things we really want to get like off the bat, I think, are automation of our web hosting. You guys, I heard we're just talking about WordPress. We have a whole bunch of Drupal websites, and it's cumbersome to try to manage those. And we also want to try to use the OpenShift and Kubernetes for research computing or HPC. So I'll talk about those two briefly. For web hosting right now, we have several hundred servers and getting really close to 1,000 websites that are Drupal and WordPress. We got 2 full-time Linux administrators that spend probably an unimaginable amount of time hand-holding the website deployment and handling upgrades. In general, like developer satisfaction is kind of low. They want to be able to do their deployments themselves. They don't want to have to, sit and wait for to handle, creation of their websites, creation of VMs. And our in-house solution for container hosting was our first attempt at trying to fix that, but it's kind of opaque, right? We don't have the same visibility that OpenShift gives a developer, with the ability to look at the containers that are running, see what's inside them, kind of automate that process. And the CLI tools for OpenShift, especially with the OC create for providing a YAML file to build a website, is extremely powerful, and I think that's something that's going to be a huge win for us in terms of swapping out the way we do traditional web hosting with OpenShift. We also want to start using OpenShift for research computing. We're specifically looking into being able to use GPU support that's in Kubernetes now, and try to run some workloads in the cloud. It's still a very early thing that we're looking at, but that we've identified that as being something that would provide a huge benefit. And honestly, if we can do this web hosting automation and the research computing aspect with OpenShift, then even if we never put anything else in it, it would be a gigantic win for us. That said, we also have a couple other things that we're intending to do. We have a project that's open source right now that has to do with deploying honeypot containers to try to gather threat intelligence and centralize some of that information in an automated fashion. And I think OpenShift would be extremely useful for that, as we have pods that can be spun up and shut down kind of quickly and automatically. We can move these things around, things that look like Drupal websites or WordPress sites, things that look like SSH daemons that are running wide open, and kind of entice attackers to give us their information, but at the same time also make it unclear to them whether or not any given thing they're looking at is a real website or a honeypot website. So we can make it harder for them to feel like they want to attack our infrastructure, really. We also want to provide the ability for the Linux and Windows admins to deploy the infrastructure services that they do as a central IT department. They may not be something that we think of as OpenShift running when you talk about things out in the world, but you know, even just like DNS servers or NTP servers, things like that, I think work really well in containers, and it would be useful for us to be able to use OpenShift to deploy those kind of things. And then functions as a service, I think, is probably something that we're going to make much more use of, especially with the honeypots and some of the other developers that we have that are doing work with kind of containerized functions as a service. That'll, I think, will give us a lot of density and provide a lot of ability for the developers to kind of more flexibly deploy the things they want to deploy and change out little pieces of microservices rather than having to develop, you know, full-fledged framework applications at any given time and manage those all together, you know. And then kind of at the very end of some things that we're starting to look at is KubeVirt, the idea of being able to use the Kubernetes virtualization layer on top of KVM and start managing virtual machines through OpenShift is extremely appealing. And the idea of using federated clusters, there's rumors that that's going to be available relatively soon. We'd love to be able to connect clusters running here in our data center to clusters in other data centers or in AWS or Google Compute or Microsoft Azure. So that's kind of what we're hoping to get out of OpenShift. Where we are now, we're in a very small alpha internally. We've got a small development cluster that we've stood up. Our operations team is trying to kind of figure out how they're going to manage this. We're still trying to build community as well and get people involved. We started an OpenShift users group for Duke. We're gathering some interested developers from other teams and giving them kind of early access so that they can play around with it. And you know, everything right now is we've got a cluster. It's not really production ready, but everybody's learning. We've decided that you know, we've made it very clear this cluster will never go to prod as is. So everything that's in it is destined to be destroyed. But this is going to be our learning experience, and the next thing that we set up will probably be a full-size production cluster and an open beta to all of our central IT department, and then a wider group of beta users outside of that. Some of our technical challenges, I'm sure everybody runs into some of these things, but most recently is the Red Hat acquisition of CoreOS. We are running our development cluster right now on top of RHEL Atomic hosts. At this point, there's been a bunch of talk about, you know, what the roadmap's going to be for RHEL Atomic, but I think the sysadmins are a little bit uneasy. We're trying to set up a production service, but it's not. We're not sure actually what operating system it's going to be running on in 6 months. So that's sort of stalling some of the early, like, low-level operational things. But we're still moving forward with.
Give you an update on that,
Yeah.
and it's now merging into something called Container Linux. So we'll get some folks over there to give you a hand with that conversation.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. And I think it's going to be fine. We got some early access to Atomic. I think we're planned to get some early access to, I guess, what Container Linux is going to be. So we'll have a chance to play with it. But it's just sort of hard to move forward without knowing what the challenges are going to be, because it's going to be deployed on something completely different than what we're using. So.
Yeah, and I think I know the new name is CoreOS. They're going to just name the whole kit and caboodle that, but there is a roadmap for that. I will get the PMs and folks to give you an update on that.
Cool. That sounds great. Thank you. One of the other issues is that everything that we're doing is sort of a moving target. Everything is changing really fast. Kubernetes is releasing new changes quickly. OpenShift is releasing new changes quickly. The OpenShift Ansible repository is changing relatively quickly. So we have a little bit of trouble keeping up with where we are in any given situation, especially since we're still learning each of these pieces. We're definitely not experts at this. We're just kind of getting started to it. So some of the defaults change over the course of time. And, our upgrade from 3.7 to 3.9 was relatively smooth, but the way things worked, especially with the OpenShift Ansible installer, was just slightly different. So it wasn't something that we could just, out of the box run and have no problems with. I think that will resolve itself as kind of everything matures a little bit further and as we get a little bit more institutional knowledge so that tracking down some of these changes becomes much easier for us. Storage is that's been a challenge with containers in general, and it still is for us, really. We've decided that it's unsustainable for us to try to do persistent volumes that are provisioned by system administrators and handed out, especially since our cluster is going to be a university-wide thing available to anybody. So we've definitely got to use the dynamic storage provisioning and the storage classes. Right now we have support for NFS, but NFS is sort of challenging in our environment. It's not necessarily related to OpenShift. It's just kind of related to the way that our environment works. So it's working all right, but it's not really ideal. We've also started looking at integration with the vSphere dynamic storage provisioning. That's working great as well, but it's also very specific to our local data center. And if we really want to run this somewhere on-prem and also in AWS and GCE and take advantage of cloud bursting capabilities and the ability to find where it's cheapest to run a particular workload at any given time, then everything needs to kind of work exactly the same for the end user. And if we have to pick different default storage classes or change the way that they interact with their storage, that's going to be, I think that's going to be a pain point for us. So I think what we're really interested in doing is evaluating the container native storage that Red Hat has been talking about at the Red Hat Summit, using the Gluster storage inside of containers. So we're evaluating that. We just don't have any Gluster or Ceph experience within our teams yet. So that's a learning thing for us as well. We're also planning on using S3 storage on premises for our container images, and we've been doing that for a while. So I think that shouldn't actually be an issue. We're just, we've got to figure out how it is that this stuff works and kind of gather the expertise. And then, our existing infrastructure was developed for a different time and a different type of workload. Like containers are completely different. OpenShift is completely different. So we have to figure out how our infrastructure works within the OpenShift environment. How do we adapt our infrastructure, or how do we adapt OpenShift to work with our infrastructure? And some of that is a very cultural thing, which kind of leads into the next topic. We have some non-technical challenges as well, and I think everybody really does. With containers in general and OpenShift specifically, there's kind of a learning curve, especially for operations. The idea of running a full-size cluster that is very interdependent and has a lot of moving pieces and a lot of moving technologies is difficult to kind of wrap your head around at first. And people sort of fear change, right? So this isn't what they've done for the last 10 years of their system administration career or the developer career. And so we're hoping to kind of ease that in for folks so that we can show them the benefits and help bring them up to speed in a way that it's clear what the value is. We have some challenges with internal team structures where things are a little siloed. So it's unclear, which team is responsible for what and what the priorities are for any given team. If we kind of break up, operational and developer advocacy and networking and all that into individual teams, and try to work within that same structure, then we have a very stop-start approach to the deployment of our cluster, because you're always waiting for somebody. So I think what we're working toward, and one of our big wins for just moving forward, will be to kind of break that down a little bit, build a cross-team group of people that are involved, and start working on it as like a tiger team or an alpha team, right? And that's probably something that just applies to the shift in IT toward a DevOps role. anyway. So if it'll be good for us, whether or not we continue to use it for OpenShift or not, like just having that experience will be helpful. We also have issues with what is a priority for us. It's clear from upper management that OpenShift is accepted. It's something that we're going to be doing. It's the way that we want to go with containers. It's the way we want to go with development. But there's a layer of, I guess there's a gap. There's a gap between upper management and the actual folks doing the implementation, where the focus on what needs to be done now, what needs to be prioritized. Does everybody drop everything and work on OpenShift full time? Do we work, only when we've got free time? Like, how do we decide that this is something we're going to be doing? And this is definitely an organizational issue. It's not a technical issue. It's not even an OpenShift issue. It's just the way that the technology has been adopted has been a little bit different. It's not. All right, so I guess I was on the existing culture. We really just need to try to figure out how this stuff is going to fit in with what we're doing. Using the cloud, federated, computing, jobs, KubeVirt, SDN, OpenShift, kube control, all that stuff is as my boss put it, it's like training for Mars, right? And we've got a bunch of really intelligent, really talented people that are already great fighter pilots. And now we just need to bring them that extra level, make them astronauts and figure out how to, encapsulate all of this new stuff and bring it into the way that we do things. I think I'm getting toward the end here, so maybe we'll make it. Oh yeah, sweet. So that's sort of where we are at the moment. So that was good timing. And we're looking forward to trying to do OpenShift Origin, trying to deploy something. I hopefully have something in full production for a beta for the entirety of our central IT department and a larger handful of developers from outside at the beginning of January. That's kind of the target that I'm trying to set for our team. And I think we'll be able to do that as long as the stuff with CoreOS ends up being kind of smooth. And then I did want to end on an anecdote that didn't make it into the slides, but happened yesterday afternoon and just kind of made my day. I've been working for maybe a week on looking at trying to do a Drupal template for our Duke Web Services team downstairs, because they're huge users of Drupal. They probably run a third of the websites that the Linux administrators run servers for. And we have been trying to get them involved into containers for several years, even since we at the very beginning started looking at it. We started looking at it to try to solve their deployment issues. I'd struggled for about a week playing around with trying to create a template, and then yesterday afternoon, just at the end of the day, one of the developers IM'd me and was like, "Hey, OpenShift is kind of cool." I was like, "Great. Sweet, so you're looking at it, like, what have you done?" He was like, "Yeah, I was trying to build a Drupal site, and it's pretty neat. Like, it's easy to use this interface and everything." So I went and took a look at his project as I'm talking to him, and he had a fully deployed Drupal website, like everything all the way down. Got his code in a Git repo, got it cloned into the PHP builder image, deployed it, added a route, added persistent volumes. And so I was a little bit shocked, and I was like, "How long did this take you? Like, who were you working with?" And he's like, "Oh, I just was playing around with it. I've only been doing it for about 15 minutes." So just on his own, without any sysadmin intervention, he was able to deploy a Drupal website using the dev cluster that we have. And that just kind of made my day. That's all that we have been trying to do for years, and OpenShift made it that easy for him. So it's kind of re-energized me. It's kind of re-energized him and some of the rest of our team, and we're looking forward to making a real template for them so that they can just start knocking these things out and migrating their applications into OpenShift. So with that, if anybody would like to chat, if you would like a copy of this presentation without, the 30,000 internet connection problems that I've had, I can be reached here, and I'm definitely looking forward to working with everybody in the EDU SIG. UNC has been super helpful in giving us some advice, and I'd love to see what other people are doing as well. And we're happy to share, our templates and our, different configurations and things that we've learned along the way. And we'd love to hear from you guys as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. I think it's good to hear from people at all the different stages of deployments and things. And while you were offline for a few minutes, there was a little bit of a conversation that I'm going to ask Stephen to repeat, because I asked him the question if any of those storage problems sounded familiar to him, and he had a good answer to that.
Yeah, and so we definitely start off with NFS, and we start off early enough that the Kubernetes storage plugin for it didn't exist. So we're doing kind of a hackish thing where we're presenting it as local storage through the VM.
Uh-huh.
And we're looking, since we have NetApps, using NetApps Trident thing, but we'd really like to move towards something like Gluster at some point. And so any experiences you have around that once you get to that point. Because again, we don't have Gluster experience here with our storage team, and so any knowledge sharing would be extremely helpful, because as we have to figure out how to migrate our existing hackish thing to something a little more modern and dynamically provisionable.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to hear what everybody else does too.
So when we start out, our intention is to start out with the Gluster on CNS. We do have some in-house Gluster knowledge outside of OpenShift entirely. We just use Gluster as a product. But in OpenShift, I haven't got it up and running quite yet. It appears that does it wrap it in is it Haketi, an API layer around managing the storage. And so from what I read, it should become automated deployment when you associate to a volume claim, I think, and I'm hoping. And the thing we liked about it is that we don't need to actually interface it directly to any particular backend storage. It co-locates with the node, and so that makes it cross-platform if we want to go to AWS or Prem or whatever, which was really attractive because one way to access it.
Yeah, that was the thing that we found really attractive about it as well. We didn't really want, anybody other than like the cluster admins to have to deal with storage. Developers or whatever should just say, give me a volume and not care what it is or where.
That's right. And the methods of managing and deploying and provisioning it shouldn't matter whether or not S or federated to another community site or on your own prem in your own data center. That was sort of what we're looking for. And we're hoping to see it in CNS with Gluster. I think CNS and Gluster might be like a revival of Gluster, perhaps. We like it as a standalone product as well, but the new life in containers.
Well, the Gluster people will be happy to hear that, and we'll definitely try and get some of maybe that's a topic for a future meeting as well. So we can get someone from that team to come in. We figure out exactly what the questions are we want to ask. The other thing that you mentioned at the beginning, Chris, that was, I think, interesting too, was your plans or your hopes for the research in HPC bits, and I think that's common across lots of .edu organizations and research groups as well. There's a lot of even in the data science departments and the use of Jupyter Hub and hosting Jupyter books, and we've got some really good content out there already on how to use Jupyter and that sort of stuff. There's some good contents on GPU that's out there as well that we can hook you up with, and there's been a lot of work on performance. So once you get the basics done of getting through your OpenShift origin deployment up and running, I think there's a lot you can do with it. So it will be, we'll be happy to hear more maybe every 3 months or 6 months get an update from you on where you're at with these things.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm happy to share.